This lovely manhwa is titled My Prince Fiancé in Name Only Actually Loved Me. If you love stories like this, please like and subscribe. It helps us a lot. She got stripped of her position as the Duke's daughter and was replaced by her cousin. Today was supposed to be the engagement celebration for the country's prince. At least that's what she thought. But on the very same day, the prince, Alexander, broke off his engagement with Lady Dolores Susbilibe right in front of everyone with his own hands. Dolores froze in shock as the prince, Alexander, pointed at her angrily, his beloved standing proudly beside him, declaring that she had oppressed and hurt his precious woman, a grave sin. Dolores clenched her dress in pain as the crowd turned on her, calling her a liar and cursing her relentlessly. On this day, her fiancé, His Highness Alexander, loudly proclaimed her condemnation for all to hear. But before all this, back in the Duke's mansion, the young lady scolded a maid, calling her a fool for ruining the soup. The maid apologized sadly and went down to pick up the broken plates. This young lady, dressed like a maid, is Dolores Susbilibe. As she reached for a plate, it cut her, and she twitched, thinking to herself that she was neither Dolores nor the daughter of the Susbilibe ducal family anymore. The young lady yelled at her, mocking that she couldn't even carry a single dish properly. Dolores, in tears, apologized again, carefully packing up the plates piece by piece. Her eyes widened in shock when the door opened. It was the Duke and Duchess, their expressions cold, demanding to know what the commotion was about. Seeing her on the floor, the Duchess called her filthy, while the young miss stood up angrily, complaining to her parents that this fool was acting clumsily again and couldn't even carry food properly. Dolores couldn't say a word. The Duke lamented, asking what kind of education his brother even gave her. The Duchess rushed to her daughter, worried if she was all right. Dolores knelt there silently, watching it all unfold. A wave of sadness washed over her as she thought about why her parents had left her alone in this world. She imagined that if only the accident 5 years ago hadn't happened, the Duke and Duchess Susbilibe would still be alive. Back then, she had cried her eyes out that night, calling desperately for her parents. If only they hadn't died, she would still be the daughter of a prestigious ducal family. Everything changed when her father's twin brother and his wife arrived. Her aunt and uncle, along with their daughter Dory, came to the mansion and took over everything. Her father and uncle were twins, so they looked almost identical, and naturally, she and Dory looked alike in a similar way. The moment they stepped into the mansion, the first thing they did was fire all the servants and replace them with new staff. They literally took everything away from her. Dory became Dolores Susbilibe, the Duke's daughter, the position that had always belonged to her. Meanwhile, she was stripped of her name and title, becoming a nameless servant. Even the other maids mocked her for acting strangely. The truth was, none of them knew her real her. No one in the mansion even knew her name. She longed desperately to return to the days when she had been happy with her parents. Back then, when she first went to the palace, she excitedly told them about encountering a boy in the palace who seemed to be in pain. When she saw him, she was surprised, and so was he. It seemed he was about to cry, but she gently patted his back, telling him it was all right, making sure he felt better. The boy, with silver hair, had been so happy to have her company, feeling comfortable with her presence. If only she could go back to the days when her life was perfect. When her mother heard her talking about the boy, she asked curiously. Dolores asked sadly if she wasn't supposed to talk to any boy she didn't know. Her mother smiled, saying it wasn't that she couldn't talk to boys, but she should remember she had a fiancé. Dolores nodded sadly, explaining that the boy had been sick for a while and had no friends, so she had volunteered to be his first friend. Back then, he had asked who she was, and Dolores had gladly introduced herself as Laura. Though her real name was Dolores, she was often called Laura, so she told him that name without thinking. Her mother had softly touched her head, reminding her that due to the permission between the royal family and the Susbilibe Dukeage, His Highness Alexander was her future husband. Dolores had pouted, complaining that they had never met. Her mother was surprised to hear her protest. Little Laura added that he didn't even write her letters, so how was he her fiancé? Her mother had worriedly told her she mustn't speak like that. Back then, and even now, the prince was nothing to her but a fiancé in name only. In the end, His Highness Alexander had only sent a letter expressing his condolences when her parents died, and had done literally nothing else for her. Laura groaned, scratching at the wound on her while washing plates. Looking around, she sadly thought to herself that even now, he probably didn't even know what kind of life she was living. Just then, a voice shouted from behind, "I heard you broke another dish." Turning, she saw the head maid glaring at her, calling her clumsy in the most annoying way. Laura apologized, trying to explain that it had been because of the young lady. The head maid, holding up one of the plates she had washed, snapped, "How dare a clumsy girl like you make excuses?" Laura's heart sank as the head maid yelled again, pointing out that the dishes were filthy and she had to wash them all over again. The maid turned and left, and Laura sulked, thinking to herself that it had been the same endless cycle every single day. It was night, and Laura finally finished her work for the day. She went to her room, which was pitch black, and collapsed onto her bed, pulling the thin blanket tightly around herself. She wondered if days like this would stretch on endlessly. She squeezed into the light blanket, shivering from the cold, when suddenly a splash of icy water poured over her. She jumped up, startled, and found herself staring at Dory, grinning mischievously with a bucket in hand. Finally awake, Dory teased. Laura, soaked from head to toe, could only glance at her in shock. Dory, full of energy, shouted about how she would soon debut in society. Laura frowned, confused, wondering where all this was heading. Suddenly, Dory grabbed her roughly, demanding your fiancé should be His Highness Alexander. Then why isn't he responding to all my letters? This is so funny. Posing as Dolores Susbilibe, she wants the prince too? I'm so satisfied he isn't responding to her. Laura didn't know what to say, but Dory blamed her anyway. "Have you done something to make His Highness hate you?" she yelled. Laura replied anxiously, "I don't even know what His Highness the Prince looks like." Dory's anger only grew. "Then how do you intend to make it up to me? With no fiancé to escort me, I'll be a laughingstock." Laura frowned coldly and asked, "Yet to give it back then?" Dory froze, shocked to hear this lowly servant daring to ask for her position back. She shoved Laura aside and turned toward the door. Before leaving, she glanced back and sneered, "I'll be definitely happier than you." Laura sat there drenched and pitiful when suddenly her head spun. Before she could react, she collapsed to the ground. The next day, Laura served as usual, though exhaustion weighed heavily on her. Dory arrived, smiling brightly, holding news that a message had arrived from His Highness Alexander. Laura watched silently as the Duke and Duchess happily announced that the prince had finally replied, agreeing to personally escort her and introduce her as his fiancée. The Duchess could hardly wait to begin preparations for the society debut. Everyone turned to Laura, who was still in shock. Her fiancé in name actually existed, it seemed. The engagement had been real all along. Watching Dory, she couldn't believe that Dory would be the one to actually marry the prince. On the day of the engagement party for the Duke's daughter, Dolores Susbilibe, and Prince Alexander, Dory appeared dressed elegantly, looking breathtaking. When Laura entered, she asked, "Did your lady call me?" Dory turned, and Laura stared sadly. Her lady grinned, teasing, "How do I look? Are you jealous?" Laura could only remain silent. Dory smirked. "Frustrated, you can't even say a word, huh? Showing off your happiness to me like that, what exactly do you want?" Laura asked, her voice trembling. "Do you hate me that much?" Dory grabbed her suddenly, anger flashing in her eyes. "Isn't it obvious?" she snapped. She didn't hesitate to say it to her face. She hated her. Laura looked at her surprised. Dory shouted angrily about how everyone used to fawn over her just because she was the Duke's daughter. She even got engaged to the prince, and though it was an arranged engagement, she still didn't deserve it. She added that their fathers were not only brothers, but twins, and that made her feel sad while Laura was happy. On every occasion when she had to hide herself, Laura always appeared, smiling and looking extremely happy. Why? Why is it?" Dory shouted, demanding to know how a slow-witted woman like her could get so much happiness. Seeing how much Dory had hated her since childhood, Laura couldn't contain her own feelings anymore. She fell to the ground, and Dory chuckled mischievously, mockingly apologizing in a teasing tone. Before leaving, she taunted her further, mocking her for not having enough clothes now, which serves you right, she said. Now you have to stay there and watch me become happy with your thumb in your mouth. Sitting on the ground, Laura realized that with all this happening, it was obvious her position had actually belonged to Dory from the start, and her own existence would likely disappear entirely. Later that night, Laura stayed in her room by candlelight, thinking to herself that by now the party would have started at the royal palace. Remembering that the engagement party was at the palace, she thought about how long it had been since she went there and played with her father. She also remembered the boy she had met at the palace, whose name was Rex. She wondered if he had grown up too and whether he would attend the party as well. Just then, her door opened. She looked up to see a maid entering. It was Susanna, carrying a cup on a tray. Laura called out in confusion, and Susanna explained it was cold, so she had brought her a cup of tea. Laura was surprised, and Susanna smiled warmly, watching her carefully. She handed her the cup and urged her to drink quickly to warm herself. I find this Susanna girl very suspicious. Why'd she suddenly bring tea and push our girl to drink? While drinking, Susanna pointed out that her clothes were a disaster and suggested she sew them for her. Laura smiled, thanking her for the tea, but her vision suddenly blurred. Susanna's smile turned cruel as she said the young lady had ordered her to do this, and she knew how tough it would be for both of them. Before she knew it, Laura didn't feel like herself anymore. She shivered, wondering what this sick, strange feeling was all about. Susanna smiled, telling her that once the young lady made her debut, it meant Laura had served her purpose. Struggling to stay on her feet, Laura asked in panic, "What do you mean?" Susanna pulled out a small bottle of liquid, saying she had been told to dispose of her. Laura froze in shock and immediately began coughing non-stop. "Don't think badly of me," Susanna continued. "If you have any grudge, blame your own fate." She locked Laura in the room and left. Laura called out for help, but she couldn't speak. She couldn't catch her breath. When she finally passed out, she woke to a completely changed environment. She sat up, panting, confusion and fear flooding her mind. "Why am I here? I was just poisoned by Susanna," she thought. Glancing down at her clothes, she noticed they weren't worn. Dory had torn them before. She blinked, trying to make sense of it. Time had turned back. Meanwhile, in the palace, Rex woke up from sleep and groaned as the sunlight nearly blinded him. Then he smiled, murmuring, "It seems like it was a success." What does that mean? Was he the reason time turned back? Still sitting on the bed, she tried to understand what was happening. Her eyes fell on a box in the corner. She picked it up, searching through it, hoping to confirm that she was truly back in the past. She froze when she saw it. Her mother's keepsake. She couldn't believe it. She was back to the time when this brooch was still with her. She remembered clearly her uncle once slapped her and taken it, commanding her to know her place because it wasn't hers to hold. She had begged him not to take it, but he left, knowing full well how much it meant to her. Dory stood by, grinning cruelly. And now, holding it again, Laura clutched it tightly, whispering to herself, "Am I really back in time?" She never believed something like this could happen to someone with such an ill fate. She remembered everything. The reply from the prince saying he would personally escort Dory, the way a single letter had made everyone treat her as useless and silenced her. She trembled as she recalled the sickening feeling of being forced to drink the poison. That definitely was not a dream. Looking at the brooch, she wondered why she had been sent back. While doing her daily chores, she glanced at the date on the newspaper. Half a year ago. She realized no one around her seemed confused by the change in time. That meant she was the only one who had traveled back and still remembered everything. Just then, Dory shoved her from behind, and the plate in her hands clattered to the ground. Dory shouted at her for spacing out, and just like before, the Duke and Duchess appeared at that moment. Dory complained as usual, and her parents glared at Laura as a warning. Watching it all unfold, Laura sighed. She was truly back in the past, but not to when her parents were alive and she was happy. If she had been sent back to when she was little, she could have stopped her parents from going on that fatal journey. But here she was again, miserable like before dying. She apologized silently to herself, thinking about it. 6 months from now, the same people would erase her from the world. While cleaning her room, she realized that if she did nothing, history would repeat itself. She looked at the window at the full moon. This time, I'll change the future. She stood up, telling herself with confidence that she wouldn't lose again. Meanwhile, at the Imperial Palace, a servant ran after His Highness, begging him to wait. He reminded him of his terrible seizure last night and urged him to rest. The prince didn't listen, smiling apologetically for worrying him. He stopped and looked out the window, seeing the full moon. "There's something I must do," he said. His servant replied, concerned, "The most important thing right now is your health, Your Highness." The prince smiled again, turning to him. "Kwan, I need you to do me a favor." "Huh? A favor?" the servant asked in confusion. "So that little boy Laura called Rex is actually the prince? That's a real plot twist. Did you see that coming?" Next day, at the Susbilibe mansion, as usual, Dory broke a plate in a fit of anger, shouting, "Why would the prince finally reply to my message with busy? Isn't His Highness my fiancé?" Laura stood quietly in the corner, watching sadly. She pressed her face in her hands, thinking to herself that Prince Alexander's cold treatment didn't start just now. Not only that, he was famous for avoiding social circles. Even as a child, she had doubted his existence. There wasn't a single portrait or record of him anywhere. She had even asked her mother once if he was even alive, only to be shut down harshly. Turning to her father childishly and asked what he thought. He softly told her to listen and understand that Prince Alexander carried something very, very heavy. Laura calmed down, her father adding that she could help His Highness bear his burden. Laura wondered if the heavy things her father spoke of were the reason the prince was always busy. Back in her room, Laura was shocked at how little money she had. With this little, even if she ran away, she can't afford an inn, let alone food, she thought, anxiously shouting to herself that she mustn't be weak. Fiercely, she knew she had to get out of the mansion. She couldn't let these people silence her again. A few days later, an incident happened in the mansion. Laura was serving food at the dining table when she overheard Dory and her father discussing His Highness's aide sending to the mansion. Dory panicked. "There's no point in his aide coming," she exclaimed. The Duke smiled, trying to calm her down. "Maybe he wants to relay a message from His Highness or something," he suggested. Dory didn't like the idea at all. Laura's heart raced. She couldn't believe His Highness's aide was actually coming, and this hadn't happened in her previous life. Could it be that the future is changing, she wondered? Soon enough, His Highness's aide arrived. The servants lined up alongside the Duke, Duchess, and Dory. Dory tried her best to maintain composure. Kwan stepped out of the carriage, introducing himself as Prince Alexander's aide, Kwan Lavino. The Duke smiled, welcoming him warmly. Laura, lined up with the maids, kept glancing at him as greetings were exchanged. Looking at Kwan, Laura recognized him. She had seen him back at the palace before. He was the legitimate son of the Lovino Marquis family, and now he had become His Highness's aide. "I can't believe it," she thought. "Lady Dolores, do you remember me?" Kwan asked Dory. She looked confused. He explained that he had seen her several times in the past. Dory smiled anxiously, claiming she didn't remember anything. Kwan shook his head, saying it was quite unfortunate. Before she knew it, Kwan stepped closer and Laura panicked. His eyes met hers, already filled with fear. Lady Dolores of the Susbilibe ducal family is known for her golden hair like sweet honey and jewel-like emerald eyes, Kwan said, then stepped back, adding, "It's strange. Her eye color looks different now." The Duke and Duchess exchanged nervous glances. Dory, flustered, quickly explained that it was because she had grown up. Kwan chuckled, still curious. Dory smiled nervously, trying to cover it. The Duke and Duchess did their best to stay calm while this unfolded. Watching all this from the side, Laura had to think, how does it feel living someone else's life? Because it's like walking on a bed of needles piled up with painful lies. Suddenly, Kwan's eyes fell in her direction and he noticed her. Laura quickly looked away, her heart pounding. When she dared to look back, he was smiling. Did he really just look at me? She wondered, her nerves tingling. They all sat in the living room, and Kwan discussed some official matters with the Duke, while Laura sat in a corner serving the snacks. She leaned forward to serve tea and got lost in her thoughts about Kwan's visit, something that never happened in her previous life. She wondered what it could mean. Immediately, she rose and left. Kwan asked the Duke to excuse him, and the Duke permitted. "Would Miss Dolores please excuse herself from her seat?" he asked, chuckling. Dory chuckled along, but it was really awkward. Dory stormed back to her room, so upset that she broke things again, shouting angrily, "Why did he even come here if it wasn't to see me?" Laura stood in the corner, speechless. Dory continued shouting that leaving her out like that, even though she was Prince Alexander's fiancé, was rude. Laura wondered, if the aide didn't come to see Dolores, then why did he come at all? Her father appeared a moment later and told her daughter that Lord Kwan had something to say earlier. Dory's face brightened immediately. "Is it a message from His Highness?" she asked eagerly. But her father's expression didn't look like it was good news, and Dory's smile faded instantly. Kwan explained that since the head of the house had passed away and the Duke had become the acting head, he hadn't visited the territory even once. The Duke stuttered, but Kwan chuckled, saying that while the Duke was earnest in his efforts, it would be proper for the acting head to conduct an inspection as well. The Duke had no choice but to agree that he would go at once. He muttered to himself about how inspections were such a hassle, as he didn't have time to listen to the common folks' complaints one by one. Laura stayed still, taking it all in. Originally, after the royal family, it had been the House of Susbilibe that managed the territory. The House of Duke Susbilibe had been granted lands by the royal family for generations. Under Laura's careful governance, the territory had prospered, but ever since her uncle became acting head, even when disaster struck, they were left unattended, and the land fell into ruin. Dory yelled at her father to leave it and not care, but he reminded her that if news of the neglect reached His Highness, it would become a real nuisance. He also made it clear that Lord Kwan must have come on His Highness's orders. Hearing all this, Laura thought to herself that it was now obvious, even after her mother and father passed, he still cared about the state of the House of Susbilibe. Dory told her father that since he was insisting on going, she would escort him part way, claiming she had some shopping to do in the territory. The Duke made it clear this was not a pleasure trip. She replied coldly that the inspection had nothing to do with her, but she wanted to do some sightseeing as well. Dory glanced at Laura in the corner, mockingly asking, "Jealous of my freedom?" Laura stayed quiet. Her lady added that she would be going to look for a dress to wear to see His Highness. Dory stood there, thinking sadly to herself that she and the others would be away from the mansion for a while. Laura, however, thought to herself, in fact, she should be thankful to Dory for making this decision. She raised an eyebrow, knowing this was her chance to finally break free. Back at the palace, His Highness, looking out the window, asked Kwan as he entered, "Did you manage to meet her?" "My fiancé? No, the fake Dolores," he said, smiling. Kwan smiled too, saying that was quite straightforward. He explained to the prince how he had tried testing both parent and child in various ways, but they didn't reveal any decisive slip-ups. The prince replied, saying one had to be as cunning as them to pull off such wicked deeds. Kwan hesitated, wanting to mention that the Duke's daughter didn't seem educated enough and wasn't fit to be his fiancé at all. Alexander glanced at him coldly. "Forget about the fake. Tell me, was she there or not? Among the servants of the House of Duke Susbilibe, the real her," Alexander said. Kwan nodded. She was there, strikingly beautiful, and those eyes, without a doubt, they are His Highness's real beloved. Alexander exhaled with relief. "For now, I'm glad to know she's alive within the ducal household." Then he grew sad. How has she been living like that? How does the prince know all about this, and why didn't he do anything before? What changed? Seeing His Highness saddened, Kwan spoke, but Alexander shouted, reminding him there was no time for sentimentality. He instructed Kwan to reinvestigate the Duke's accident. Kwan was surprised. "Do you mean what you just said?" Alexander softened. "I would have died if I hadn't met her, so no matter what it takes, I want to save her." The next day, the carriage was ready. The Duke and Duchess, alongside Dory, made their way inside. The maids bowed outside, wishing them a safe trip. Laura bowed too. Dory smirked through the window as the carriage moved. Laura coldly thought to herself, tonight is the only chance. With her uncle and the servants spread thin, there couldn't be a better moment to escape. Back in her room, Laura took out her mother's brooch, thinking, the jade color is just like her father's eyes. She smiled, feeling like both her parents were watching over her. She remembered how her uncle had taken the brooch in the past, but now she knew she wouldn't let anyone take it again. She told herself confidently that she would treasure it, and her father and mother would keep protecting her from wherever they were. Laura opened the door slowly and looked out into the quiet hallway. It's usually like this at this hour. Everyone's working, trying to finish so they can go to sleep. She stepped out carefully, thinking to herself that the servants here didn't hold loyalty to her uncle or that young lady. Laura jumped into the garden and crawled quietly to avoid being seen. She peeked out and saw one of the guards at the gate stretching. Immediately, she ducked behind a corner, but she couldn't stay perfectly still. A rustle in the grass gave her away, and the guard called out, "Who's there?" Panic shot through her. What should I do? I might get caught. She decided to make a cat's meow sound as the guard approached. He looked around, confused, wondering if it was really a cat. When he went to check, Laura quietly followed behind and escaped his notice. She reached the gate, which the guard had left unattended, gently pulled it open, stepped out, and closed it behind her. She ran off, excited. I did it! I finally escaped! She thought. She glanced back at the gate and couldn't help but remember her family, how they looked the last time she saw them before the accident. She held the brooch tightly, telling herself, this isn't the time to cry. It's time to move forward. If she ever comes back here, it'll be to take back what they stole from her. Walking through the forest, she knew her uncle would hire pursuers once they discovered she was gone. She had to get far away before that. After walking a long distance, she groaned in pain, leaning against a tree. Her legs hurt, but she knew she couldn't stop. She forced herself to take a few more steps, though her vision blurred. She remembered Rex back in the garden, how she rubbed his back and his coughing stopped. She smiled, telling him everyone said her hands were warm and soothing. Rex had looked into her eyes, seeing a reflection of her father, and said it was nothing. He thanked her, smiling, and told her his name was Rex. She had called him by his name, and he had chuckled, saying he felt much better. Laura opened her eyes to the morning sunlight. She couldn't believe she had dozed off here. How long did I sleep, she wondered, amazed at how nostalgic the dream had felt. Sitting on the ground, she thought about how shocked Rex would be if he saw her now, looking so shabby. Looking at the sunlight, Laura said really wanted to see him again, and then wiped her face and muttered to herself that she had regained some strength and needed to hurry into town. Standing there, she didn't notice two figures quietly approaching from behind. Oh no, my poor baby. I hope nothing bad happens and she doesn't get caught. Finally, she reached the town. People bustled all around and she breathed a sigh of relief. She had made it. Now, with eyes wide, Laura mumbled she was really hungry and hadn't eaten anything since last night. Her legs had reached their limits too. Just then, she heard a voice asking if she was in some kind of trouble. On turning, it was two young men who looked like troublemakers. She wondered who they were scaredly, and one of them suggested showing her around the town. She thanked him, saying no, but before she knew it, they grabbed her hand, asking her not to be shy. We'll take you to a tasty place. She struggled, shouting for them to let go of her, and immediately a voice came shouting at them, "Take your hands off her!" Laura slowly opened her eyes, confused, and turned to see who it was. It was a young man covered in black from head to toe. Oh my! This should now be renamed Laura's Life Outside the Susbilibe Mansion. Don't touch her with those dirty hands, the man in black said angrily, leaving Laura completely shocked. Before she knew it, the man came forth and blocked Laura from the men, shouting that he was with her, suggesting they leave quietly without causing a scene. Laura panicked, wondering why this young man was suddenly lying like that. The men laughed, and one of them asked what he had just said and told him not to mess with them because they could easily take her by force. Hearing that, he pushed our girl behind him, then coldly said, "It seems there was no room for negotiation." The men freaked out. The other whispered to his bro to let go because this guy's aura was really strange and not ordinary. "You don't step back right away," the men interrupted him immediately before he took action, saying they quit so he should get rid of that killing intent. Laura was surprised and wondered what they meant by killing intent. She wondered if this oppressive feeling coming from this guy is really what they called killing intent. Those men ran off immediately, and Laura bowed, grateful that he helped her. He asked if she was hurt anywhere, but she told him she was fine, thinking to herself, this person had just helped her. He smiled, saying he was flustered and didn't expect her to move this quickly into the city. Laura was confused and wondered what this young man meant by her acting quickly. This guy is definitely the prince. How did he even know she'd move? He realized what he had just spouted out and began faking a cough. Laura watched confused and said, "This is embarrassing." The man pointed behind her, and she turned. He told her he was currently staying on the secondary floor of the building, and below it was a restaurant. Looking at it, Laura could tell that it was an inn. The man, whose face was still covered, asked her to come with him. She glanced at him and agreed. Inside, she was served with plenty of hot dishes all around, and she excitedly stated that they all looked delicious. He asked her to go on and eat, but she suddenly refused. She couldn't just accept food from a stranger. Silly Laura. Her expression when she saw the food at first says otherwise. The place fell silent when her stomach rumbled and he laughed. She couldn't believe her stomach had chosen to embarrass her at this moment. She mumbled for it to calm down, and he told her it seemed her stomach was more honest. She smiled, apologizing for that. She stared at him, thinking to herself she couldn't believe she ended up following someone she didn't know and giving in to hunger. She could tell that he seemed so suspicious. He noticed her looking and cleared his throat and asked if by any chance she found him suspicious. He slowly took off his covering, apologizing. Laura, on seeing his actual face, was surprised, and her cheeks turned red because of how handsome he looked. So it's actually the prince, huh? This is really getting interesting. Laura was amazed at how handsome he was, with such beautiful eyes too, but froze immediately. She knows someone with eyes as beautiful as his. Judging by the way she was looking at him, he asked if there was something on his face, but she smiled and said no. At that moment, she suddenly remembered the eyes of the boy she met 7 years ago when she was young, Rex. His eyes were just like his. It's so unfortunate that she didn't recognize him. He didn't change much from childhood. Though his eyes were so beautiful, she knew she had to be cautious as a fugitive. "My name is Alex. What is yours?" he asked calmly. She hesitated, thinking to herself she needed to hide the fact that she ran away so she couldn't tell him her name was Dolores. He was waiting for her to say her name, confusedly, and she told him her name was Laura. "My name is Laura. Should I call you Lord Alex?" she asked, smiling. Alex stared at her quietly and shook off his gaze in confusion. Laura was confused and called him Lord Alex, worriedly. He cleared his throat, cheeks turning red. He told her it was nothing. She was surprised. She thanked him for the meal after she was done, and he chuckled, saying she had quite an appetite, asking if her hunger had been satisfied. She smiled, saying yes, and that was all thanks to him. He chuckled, saying he'd like to see her keep enjoying her meal. Laura was confused and asked what he meant by keep watching her eat. He panicked immediately and began coughing nonstop nervously. She called out to him, worried, and asked if he was all right. He stood, saying he needed to excuse himself and would return soon. Confused, she rose and called after him as he left. He went to the backyard, coughing violently, clutching his chest. "We finally met," he murmured. Laura rushed after him, calling his name. She touched his forehead and realized he had a terrible fever. She told him he needed to go back and rest immediately, but he just smiled, saying he was fine. She glared at him coldly, asking what he was even thinking. He should just go to his room and lie down. "Wait, Laura," he called out desperately as she tried to help him. She didn't listen, leaning him against herself and moving forward. He had no choice but to calmly let her guide him inside. Reaching his room, she laid him down on the bed and tried to ease his headache with water and a handkerchief. She placed it gently on his forehead and asked if he was all right. She wondered aloud why he would help a stranger like her when he was in such a condition, and urged him to take better care of himself. He just smiled, then reaching out his hands to her, asked if he could trouble her one more time. He wanted to hold his hands, just for a little while. She was confused, but agreed without a single negative thought. She held his hands, and he smiled, thanking her. She was touched by how bright he looked despite his pain. She muttered to herself, feeling oddly unsettled. Why was she feeling like this? Something about him was throwing her off balance. Back at the Susbilibe mansion, Dory had returned and couldn't wait to brag about everything to Laura and make her miserably jealous. "I'm home," she shouted as soon as she entered the room, only to be met by the other maids. She glared at them and suddenly demanded to know where that pathetic lady was and why she hadn't come to greet her. When they told her Laura had disappeared, she erupted in anger, yelling at them in frustration, demanding to know what they had been doing. They apologized, but Dory was furious. She thought bitterly to herself. The woman who was supposed to be confined in this mansion until her debut as Dolores had disappeared? Where did she go? Dory glared angrily. The head maid rushed in, trying to calm her and apologize for their insufficient surveillance. She assured Dory that pursuers had already been sent to search for her. "That pathetic woman will soon be found," the maid whispered strangely. All the servants had grown just as wicked as their master. It's quite a shame. Meanwhile, in town, Laura tended to Alex carefully. Alex thought to himself how worried she had been about him. The moment he woke up and saw her there, he realized she was still worried, but she didn't know he cared about her even more than his own health. He wanted to see her once more, wanted to protect her, to save her. "Lord Alex," she called, worriedly. He thought to himself that he had no choice but to do what he did. What exactly had the prince done to bring her back in time? Alex couldn't forget the despair of that night when Dory had introduced herself as Dolores Susbilibe at the engagement. He had known immediately she was an imposter, stealing the real Dolores' identity. He understood the cruel fate that awaited the real Dolores. While Dory foolishly paraded herself, he had looked away and clenched his hands in frustration. He couldn't believe he hadn't noticed sooner. He was so angry that even Dory could feel it. "Who are you?" he demanded, terrifying her. She claimed to be Dolores, but he pointed at her angrily, demanding she stop speaking lies. He called her an imposter in front of everyone, shocking her family. "Lord Alex," Laura called out, and he snapped back to the present. So that was what had happened at the party after they poisoned Laura. If only she knew all this. If only she knew her beloved knew the truth. Alex smiled when he heard her call and immediately answered. He held her hand tightly and hugged her. She froze in surprise. He actually called her by her name and got her confused. This was the first time a man had hugged her like this. Alex asked if she had somewhere else to go after this, and she blinked, unsure what to say. Then he explained, softly but firmly, that he wanted to help her. "I can't just leave you when you're in trouble," he said, leaving her stunned. He pulled back from the hug quickly and admitted, a little awkwardly, that his health wasn't strong. Laura's eyes widened. He had a weak health condition? Alex then told her he was the manager of the shop and inn. She was shocked. "Really?" she asked. He smiled and asked what she thought. Then, almost shyly, he asked, "If you don't mind, would you like to work in this restaurant and take care of me?" Laura's surprise deepened. He added hesitantly that having her by his side would make him feel better, so if she hadn't decided where to go, she should think about it. Laura, still confused, asked what he meant by feeling better when she was around. "That's right," he said, and then asked her to touch his head and see for herself. She did and confirmed his fever was gone. Alex chuckled, saying it was all thanks to her, then teasingly asked if whenever he felt unwell again, would she hold his hand and nurse him? Laura was shocked. The idea of holding hands felt strange. Before she could respond, he hugged her again without asking, saying that part was the most important. "From now on, would it be all right if I hugged you like this?" Asked. Laura's shock grew, so it didn't stop at holding hands. This prince is so straightforward. He doesn't want to waste time and wants to spend every moment holding her close. I love it. The next day at the restaurant, Laura resumed work serving customers cheerfully. The madame in charge of dishes kept calling out to her non-stop because there were so many deliveries to tables. Laura thought, this is exhausting, but she kept going. Meanwhile, someone was watching her through the window, eyes fixed on her every move. Elsewhere in the town, the pursuers met with the two young men who had once tried to harass Laura. The men confirmed they had indeed seen an unfamiliar girl. What was she wearing? The pursuers asked. They replied that she fled from the forest and her clothes were extremely dirty. The pursuers exchanged glances. Their leader immediately commanded them to split up and search. He said he would check the inns while the other two searched clothing stores and the stagecoach station. Before leaving, he handed the two men a token of money, thanking them for the information. Back at the restaurant, Laura was washing plates, grateful to Lord Alex for arranging this work and shelter for her. At this point, I really don't know what His Highness is thinking. Why wouldn't he just tell her who he is and free her from all this suffering? Laura couldn't believe she now had the strange mission of looking after Lord Alex, always asked to touch his head, and he was too cute for her to refuse. Finally done, the madam praised her and told her to rest. Laura gratefully accepted. Poor girl. She used to wash plates in the mansion, constantly made to rewash even when they were spotless. She slipped out the back door, but she didn't notice someone following her. When she realized it, she turned cautiously and asked who was there. Back at the restaurant, the leader of the pursuers appeared, striding in with authority. The madam frowned, telling him they were closed for the day. "Or are you staying the night?" she asked. He shook his head sharply. "I'm not a customer," he said clearly. "I'm looking for someone. Have you seen a girl from out of town dressed in a maid outfit, looking a bit dirty?" The madam hesitated, puzzled. I wonder if I have," she said. The man's patience snapped. He shouted at her, warning her not to play games. Just then, the other pursuer stomped in, reporting that an urgent message had arrived from the mansion. The leader's eyes widened as he grabbed the letter. Opening it, he was visibly shocked. The others pressed for details, and he told them they had been ordered to return immediately. One of them muttered, "Must be another tantrum and the young lady." They all knew it didn't matter. The order was the order, and they had to obey. Before leaving, they turned to the madam, apologizing for the intrusion. She glared at them as they disappeared back into the forest. Was that letter really from the mansion? Dory wouldn't throw a tantrum just to have them come back for her dog. Meanwhile, the girl's mysterious follower wasn't who she feared. It was Alex. He slipped behind her quietly, wrapping his arms around her in a gentle hug as she turned. "How's work going?" he asked, voice soft and teasing. Laura smiled, feeling warmth spread through her. "There's still a lot I'm not used to, but it's enjoyable. I'm learning." She glanced up at him, silently thanking him for introducing her to this life. They were so close that she could feel his presence completely. His eyes locked on hers, and she felt herself growing shy, quickly looking away. His face, it's beautiful today, too, she thought. "Laura, why are you looking down?" he asked, a playful edge in his voice. She stuttered, caught off guard. He leaned closer, voice low and soft. "I just wanted to see your cute face." "Cute face?" she repeated, stunned. "Yes," he said, smiling. "You're cuter than anyone else." Her cheeks burned. "Where were you?" she asked, panic mixed with curiosity. "I was watching you while you worked," he said, laughing softly. "Even though you're not used to it, you kept smiling, happily. It was beautiful." Laura felt her entire face turn crimson. She wondered how he could say such things so effortlessly. "No matter what anyone says, Laura, you're the best woman," he whispered, pulling her tight. She scoffed nervously. "Stop exaggerating." He turned her gently, looking deep into her eyes. "I'm not exaggerating," he said, brushing her cheek softly. "I like you just the way you are." Did he just confess to her? Laura froze, heart racing. "He likes me?" she thought, glancing at him, a new question forming in her mind. Could he really be Rex from her childhood? Her cheeks were flaming, her breath catching, and she realized he was leaning closer, almost kissing her. This is really going so fast, and I like it. So that's where we'll leave Dolores' wild adventure today. If this story has you wanting more, please let us know. Just comment Dolores.